Hello people, I'm Jaby Koay. Joining us is ACHARA KIRK.
Hello.
And we are going to discuss Dunkirk. That rhymes. Dunkirk, ACHARA KIRK. So, there is no relation between the two, because Dunkirk is French.
Yes, I found that name very confusing actually. I didn't realize it was in France because it sounds like almost a Scottish name. But there you go.
Well, it's from the Scottish part of France.
That makes perfect sense.
So, let's talk about Dunkirk, shall we?
Yes.
Let's establish one thing, though. We watched this film twice. We watched it on Thursday night, the very first show possible in Los Angeles at 6:30 p.m. at AMC Burbank 16, and in 35mm, because I don't pay for AMC IMAX unless it's at Universal Studios. Those of you who live in Los Angeles will understand what the heck I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. And then today, this afternoon, we watched it again in 70mm IMAX at Universal City Walk. And so, the very first time we watched it, we were both kind of like, well, that was interesting. It was certainly beautiful.
Yeah.
It had some moving moments, but overall, we lacked a connection with the movie, I would say. And we actually shot a whole review to it, but then we started seeing other people's responses to the film, including Ricky Elliott, a friend of mine who is someone a lot of you are familiar with if you've watched any of my short films. And, well, he said he loved it. And he proceeded to shoot me a diatribe of Facebook messages as to why he loved it. And I was like, well, shit. I certainly shouldn't put a review out just yet. Because our review was kind of like, we liked it, but we didn't love it.
Yeah.
Maybe we missed something. And
Yeah.
so, would you agree with all of that?
I would, yeah. And I think definitely upon second viewing, there were a lot more nuances and little things that we missed the first time for whatever reason, which I'm sure we'll go into in a little bit. But it definitely kind of gave me more feels.
Sure.
On the second time round.
So just to be very clear and have full disclosure at the very front here, this is going to be a very generic review up until I say spoiler alert. Once I say spoiler alert, that is the indication that there may be spoilers coming.
Yeah, and if you don't want to hear them, you should GTFO.
Yes, that. So, just because I say spoiler alert, if you've seen the movie, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to go full into spoilers, because sometimes I just don't know how to. I just say things and I'm like, well, that wasn't really a spoiler, was it? But I said spoiler alert just in case.
Yeah.
So, okay, so in general, I would say that watching it in IMAX is the premier way to watch it. Like, you shouldn't watch it any other way. It's gonna be jarring for you if you've never, no, I wouldn't say that, because this was your first experience in IMAX.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think that, you know, the way the way Christopher Nolan filmed it, it was done so beautifully, and especially the aerial shots looked amazing on the big screen there.
Right, but the swap between 35 and 70mm didn't bother you at all, right?
I didn't even notice it, to be honest.
Okay, see, there you go. So most people won't notice it. I'm the kind of guy that notices because I'm a particular asshole that notices everything. So, but even me being me in the kind of way that I am, it didn't bother me that much when I was watching it. There was just some moments where it's like 70mm, 35mm, 70mm.
I didn't even notice it at all.
I'm like, why? You got the money. Shoot it all in IMAX. Why don't you? It's like literally only 10 minutes of the movie was in 35mm or something, like 15 minutes of the movie was in 35mm. I'm like, why even have any of the movie in 35mm at all? I didn't understand. I mean, I would love to look at the behind the scenes and to understand the logistics behind why you would do that. But most of the movie was in IMAX. And I think that is in part why the movie was only 2 hours. Because he wanted it to be a length that was, you know, just enough so that he could have an excuse for getting most of the movie in IMAX, because it's probably really expensive to shoot in that format. But I'm thinking, like, in the grand scheme of things, it can't be that much. Like, that's got to be the smallest part of the budget. Like, being able to shoot on the red camera instead of film, it doesn't actually save you that much when you're doing a $100 million picture.
Okay.
So it's like, that's a smaller expense in the grand scheme of things. Anyway.
Okay.
What I'm trying to get at is, we have 4.5 minutes in here. All I'm trying to say is, go watch it in IMAX if you're going to watch it at all. That is the best way to watch this movie. You'll get the full experience of it. Mm-hmm. I would say don't sit too close to the front.
Yes, do not.
Because then you'll be kind of nauseous.
Yeah.
Unlike other films from Christopher Nolan where he does IMAX, because I've seen pretty much every single one he's done in IMAX, he gets a little bit more experimental with the shaky cam in this one because it's a war and whatnot. Whereas in like Dark Knight Rises, and was there another one? Interstellar, maybe? The camera didn't really shake at all in those pictures. Whereas here, it's a war sequence, they're running on the beach and whatnot, and the camera's shaking. And it's like, to see 70 millimeter shaking, it's a little bit disorienting. So don't sit too close to the front is all I'm trying to say. I think that we can. That's about as much as we can say about it without getting too deep into any specific details.
Well, I want to say just that as a film, I think that it's a very interesting and good exploration of what it's like to be in war. It doesn't glorify it. It just is very matter of fact.
Sure.
I feel it's almost as if you were there.
Right. Oh, one important thing. If you haven't seen it yet and you're like waiting on Jaby's review to watch it, which I doubt. I'm sure you guys have seen it already, or you've seen a bunch of other reviews already by the time you're getting to this one. Know that going into it, it's not a normal, what do you call it? Linear. It's not a linear timeline. It has 3 different timelines, and it's interspliced so that you don't lose momentum in any of those timelines. The film is like, on a scale of 1 to 10, the momentum's at a 10 from start to finish.
Yeah. Totally.
It doesn't let up until the end of the movie. And so the first timeline is 1 week. That's Dunkirk. The second timeline is the ships, which is a day. The third timeline is the air sequences, which is an hour. And it's interwoven in such a way that if you don't realize what kind of movie you're watching, it is incredibly confusing as to what's going on or whose perspective you're seeing it from.
Right.
But seeing it the second time, knowing that, I was like, okay, I see it all. Now it's effing obvious in retrospect. Now I get it. But the thing is, like, he should have had like some kind of diagram, because he just says words. Like he
starts off with the mole,
and then 1 week, but he really should have had a diagram like this. Oh, you can't see shit. Hold on. Oh, there you go. See that? Like a thing like that. And he said like this is 1 week, and then like this is 1 day, and then 1 hour. Like lines or something like that. You can't see any of it, but you guys kind of get it. Like that would have helped if I have some kind of visual to understand the timeline that we're working with.
I think Christopher Nolan is just one of those directors who's kind of like, I'll give it to you a little bit, but
are you goddamn kidding me? This is the guy that did he did Inception. If you go back and watch Inception, he like shoves that shit down your throat so you really understand what's going on because he recognizes that you could get confused. Whereas this time he's like, you're on your own on this one. If you don't get it, then...
I don't know. There were still moments in Inception the first time I watched it when I was a little bit confused.
Oh, I wasn't confused at all watching Inception because he hammered it home so hard about what was going on. I didn't get confused. Anyway, this is not about Inception. All I'm trying to say is go into it knowing that it has these different timelines that are interwoven, but it's all the same story.
Yeah.
So...
And it feels very much like a window into that period in history, like a kind of slice of life moment.
Yes.
As if you were watching almost a documentary.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go into the spoilers a bit. So, if you guys don't want any spoilers, this is the spoiler alert. Well, all that means is we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the movie.
Yeah.
So you can leave now. I recommend to watch it in IMAX.
Yes.
So, this is us waiting now for you to go.
Bye.
Do not bitch. If you're in the middle of washing dishes, wipe your freaking hands and pause the video. There you go. Okay. So now we're gonna talk about the movie a little bit more. So we have 3 timelines, right? The first one is Tommy. Tommy's the main character in The Mole, and then we have Mr. Dawson, who's the main character in The Sea.
He's my favorite.
Yeah, he was my favorite too.
Yeah.
And then Tom Hardy's character Farrier, who is the pilot in The Air.
He was also a badass.
And just to reiterate, The Mole lasts 1 week, Sea lasts 1 day, Air lasts 1 hour.
Yes. And then...
The very first time we watched it, like I said earlier, like I was confused. I was a little bit confused as to like how this jumping around thing was working. Like I thought the timeline was linear, and then just had some flashback sequences to give you a different perspective. I didn't realize initially that, and I consider myself a savvy viewer, so for me to get confused, I was like, how did that happen? I can only imagine how other people are feeling. And so, my mom, I wonder how my mom would feel watching this movie. I feel like she would be so lost. So. Anyway, watching it a second time and knowing that, I was like, wow, I really appreciate how this was done.
Yeah.
I just wish that it was more obvious at the outset, the first time, what was going on.
Or maybe we're just doofuses and we just didn't get it.
That's entirely possible.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case. I think a number of people got confused because you go online and there are articles breaking down exactly what was going on. I'm like, oh, it's obvious now. Like, as soon as someone starts to explain it, then I'm like, oh, yeah.
Totally makes sense.
So,
so shall we start with the mole?
Well, I want to start with the very opening. Like, I thought that opening was so cool because it almost felt like a monster movie. It was treating the Germans like they were monsters, which come on, let's be real. Like, those bastards were monsters during the war. Today, they're cool, I guess. I don't know. I haven't been to Germany. I don't know what the tension's like over there with racism and whatnot. I have no idea. I won't make any assumptions. But during that era, those Nazis were bastards, and fuck them. So, they were monsters, and they were treated as such in the film. Like, you just heard gunfire, and the camera was following the soldiers as they were running, and they were getting picked off. And then you had your main character, Tommy, who survives, like, against all odds. Like, he just is the surviving character throughout the film, right? And there was this weird transition when he leaves that area, and he goes to the beach, and it just immediately it illustrates to you how once the fighting stops, you just have to be calm. Like, there's no panic except when you need to be. Even during when the Germans were dropping their payload on the beach, like, the English people were just like, is it done?
Yeah, well, I think that's really emphasizing kind of the coldness and stoicism of war. To a certain point, after the initial shock and fear and terror, once you're used to it, it just becomes like another day. And, like, even imagining, civilians who were living at that time, can you imagine, like, you're like, la 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 la, I'm in school, oh, here's another bomb. I better duck under the table or something.
Right.
Although that whole town of Dunkirk was absolutely deserted.
Right. Well,
I'm wondering
I
where all the
suppose
people
this
went.
is true of any sort of area that's kind of riddled with chaos and violence. Like, you just kind of get accustomed to it. If you're living in the ghetto, for instance, and you hear gunshots, you're just kind of used to that. That's just part of your lifestyle. And so here, they've been there waiting for what was the word they used in the deliverance. And they're just waiting for it. And, like, there was this crazy shot at the very beginning. And it helps when it's an IMAX too, because we really see the scope of it. And there's these two bars, these parallel bars, and I got two meanings from that. And you tell me what you thought. I'll say mine first.
Okay.
So the two thoughts I had was jail, because they were trapped here like it was their jail. They couldn't go anywhere, even though home was right there. They couldn't go anywhere. That was the first meaning I got. And the second meaning I got, it's like a visual double entendre, was the closeness of these two poles. One represented France and the other represented England.
Oh. Wow. I didn't realize the symbolism of that.
I don't know. I might be projecting. I saw that. I'm like, what is he doing with that? What does that mean?
Yeah.
Because he's showing it. There's a reason for this other than it just being visually cool. Like, why is he showing us these poles? What does it mean?
Well, I think there's so many things in the film that, upon deeper examination, you're like, oh yeah, that there was that motif, there was that theme. And
I know, but what do the poles mean to you? Do they mean anything to you, or just look cool?
They just look cool. I didn't think that didn't.
It had
cross
to
my
mean
mind.
something because he spent so much time on it. Like, other than just being aesthetic, there had to be some kind of meaning behind it. I refuse to believe that he didn't assign some kind of meaning, at least himself, with showing us that.
Oh, I'm sure.
There's got to be something there. So, anyway, there's this great moment when Tommy's on the beach, like, ducking. And it's even better in IMAX, where you see the bombs, the payload dropping.
Oh, yeah.
And he's just waiting there. And once again, he survives. And
then the dude, like, right next to him is...
Yeah, just tossed by the bomb, yeah.
Oh, that was really cool.
Did you notice that Tommy tried to poop twice?
Yes.
I didn't notice that the first time I watched the movie. Like, he was grabbing papers from the air, and he started undoing his pants, or putting in his pants or something. And I didn't know what was going on. It was only watching it the second time, like, all these little nuances start to come out, and I'm like, oh, this is a movie you really should watch twice.
Yeah.
Because a lot of stuff starts to reveal itself, and you're like, I didn't even notice. Like, I didn't like make sense of why the soldier that was being buried had his shoe off. Like, I just thought that, like, something happened. Yeah, something happened. His shoe fell off. I didn't connect the dots that this French soldier took his clothes.
Yeah.
You know?
But it's like, I think that's the really cool thing about this is so much of it happens without dialogue.
Yeah.
Like the whole time, it never crossed my mind that this one dude didn't even talk until it was called out.
Right.
I just assumed, you know, you're in war. Sometimes you don't need to talk.
You
Sometimes
respond differently.
it's enough
Yeah.
to just have a look and be like, we're cool. And what was really interesting was how they connected so quickly, those two.
Right.
Both with their desire for survival. And I
Right.
think this story on the beach is just all about survival.
Sure, yeah.
And like the lengths that you will go to, even if it's completely shameful and cowardly.
Yeah.
You know? All because you don't want to die.
Right. Well, the thing is, another thing to your point is that guy could have just been a mute after seeing the atrocities of war.
Yeah. I mean, plenty of people, like Cillian Murphy's character, he was shell-shocked at what we now call post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Right. Or disorder.
Disorder, sorry.
Yeah, that's all good.
PTSD. There we go.
So there's the beach stuff. You know, just to let you guys know, like I don't know if you skip to the non-spoiler part because there's going to be a timestamp that says, you know, jump to the non-spoiler section of this review. If you missed the non-spoiler section, I mentioned that we watched this twice, and the first time we watched it, we didn't love the movie. I think that I've come to strongly have an affinity and an affection for this movie now, an appreciation for this movie now, having watched it twice and getting the full scope of it and a better understanding as to what he was aiming for. The first time I was confused a little bit, and I didn't connect with the characters.
Yeah.
That was the problem for me. There wasn't a lot of character development in this movie. I still stand by the fact that I would have appreciated more character development.
I agree.
But I somehow, by watching it a second time, I got to appreciate the characters that we got a little bit more.
Yeah, because you notice more of the nuances because once you start knowing a little bit more about their backstory and their needs and wants more,
Yeah.
it's a little bit easier to connect. Now, is it like other war movies where sometimes, you know, you feel this deeper connection?
Right.
Not really, but I think maybe that's just what he wanted to, you know, like just to be this reflection of what it might be like to be at war because you don't know if the person beside you is going to survive or not.
Well, I think that is almost like the way I've heard Ryan Gosling described. Like they say Ryan Gosling when he acts, he does a lot of nothing.
Yes.
And what that permits is the audience to project their own feeling onto
Yeah,
Ryan Gosling.
totally.
Which is a fascinating idea. And I think a lot of that was happening here, where you didn't get much from these people, like their backstory. But that allowed you to kind of project your own thoughts onto what they were going through, their efforts to survive, their desire to survive. You kind of just project yourself onto all these different people that are involved. You know, whether it's Tommy or Mr. Dawson, the guy who's piloting the boat at sea, or Farrier. Like you just mostly saw Tom Hardy's eyes, and you made from his the little expressions in his eyes, the nuances there, what he was going through, what he was thinking, what he was feeling. And I would have liked a little bit more spoon feeding as to what he was feeling, but it still worked really well. I still connected really well, especially the second time.
I just felt like, at least with his character, he was very much the consummate professional. He was always calm. He was really good at his job.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he was going to do what it takes for his country.
Yeah.
As shown at the very end.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, yeah, exactly. There was a whole thing, like, Ricky Elliott broke it down for me, how at the end, Christopher Nolan does this thing where you've got hope for Tom Hardy's character, Farrier, and he's like pumping the thing to get the wheels out, and it's really beautiful and epic, and then he plane lands, and you're like, yes, and then he gets out of the plane, and then the German soldiers get him, and the way Ricky Elliott put it was, that's the realistic thing that would have happened.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's actually genius. I fucking hate you now for telling me that, because it's so genius. Like, it's so subtle and so smart. What kind of tripped me out, though, was how it faded to black twice at the end. I didn't really understand that. Like, what was the meaning behind doing that? It felt like such a French thing to do. Like, because French filmmakers are very experimental. Like, it faded out on the airplane.
Yeah.
And then it faded out on the main kid, who had kind of like this innocent look about him. But I didn't know what that look meant. I still don't know what it means. I've seen the film twice. I don't know what that look at the end means. Like, Is it just relief? Like, what is that? Is there some other look that we can parallel that with from the beginning of the movie? Like, I don't know what that was about. So,
well, like, as I was saying with Tommy's story and all of the soldiers on the beach, like, it was very much about survival, right? And then at the very end, Harry Styles' character, when the old blind dude is giving them the blankets and he says, well done, boys. And he's like, we didn't do anything, we just survived.
Yeah.
I feel like that kind of has that kind of survivor's guilt,
Sure.
that feeling of failure, because this was a massive military disaster,
right.
basically, a massive snafu.
Right.
And, like, what could they do? They were just a bunch of kids and they just wanted to come home.
Right.
And what I really enjoyed about that whole bit on the mole with the soldiers and everything, and all throughout the majority of the film was the amazing score by Hans Zimmer, and then that undercurrent of the ticking.
Yes.
Like, almost like a ticking time bomb, or the passing of time, because as we now know, it was 1 week,
right.
1 day,
right.
and 1 hour.
Right.
So I feel like time plays a massive important motif
right.
in this thing. And then as soon as they got on the train in England,
right.
all that ticking stopped.
Right.
And so it felt almost like a relief, because all the time they'd been so stressed. And maybe that's why Tommy couldn't poop. Because, like, he didn't have a moment alone. Every time he was gonna, like, go to the toilet,
I just love
someone
this,
was
like,
there.
crescendo of ideas all to amount to, and that's why he couldn't poop. Like, it's just such a weird ending to all that big diatribe of information you just gave us. But one of the things I wanted to point out that is interesting from a filmmaker's perspective, like, some people have experimented with time dilation in their films. Certainly Christopher Nolan has before. But the thing about Christopher Nolan that makes him special is that he only does it when that's the best way to tell that story. Like, there's
Right.
no better way to tell Memento, for instance. Like, if you told that in forward order, it would be boring. It wouldn't be that interesting of a movie at all. It's interesting because it's told in that order, and the revelation of information makes way more sense that way from an entertainment standpoint, right?
Yeah. And this just helped the story move along at a better pace.
Well,
I think.
you were able to stay connected to the characters over the course of the entire film, because if they told this in order, you wouldn't have as much of a connection with Tom Hardy or Mr. Dawson. Like, that stuff comes later. Like, in the grand scheme of this story, they show up near the end. But because of the way it was told, you were connecting with these people the whole time.
Right.
Yeah. So I thought that in the end, I've come away realizing that the movie's kind of genius. I think that if it had an extra 20 minutes, just like, or 10 of character development for each of these people, I would have really, really appreciated that. But it still works as it is. So,
well, talking about character development, I felt for me that the characters that I connected with the most were the ones on the boat. Mr. Dawson, his son Peter, I think, and young George.
Yeah. Well, certainly Mr. Dawson. There was something super, like...
He's Mark Rylance is a brilliant actor.
Yeah, but, like, everything he did had carried so much meaning with it that you could get everything you needed from him. I just wish the audio was done a little bit different. Like, I feel like this is Christopher Nolan's, like, thing, because he did the same thing in Interstellar, where when Christopher, is that his name?
Michael Caine.
Michael Caine. Why do I keep saying Christopher? So Michael Caine, he had this big revealing moment of the truth of what was going on.
Right.
And the music had this huge crescendo, and I couldn't hear shit. I couldn't hear what Michael Caine was saying. And this was a common issue through all the screenings of this film, that it was complained about in articles and stuff. And apparently Nolan did this on purpose because he was more focused on what was going on here, the emotional content. But you don't normally do that in a movie. You don't normally cover up the dialogue with music, especially in that way. It felt like a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, but I feel like it was definitely done here. Because I'm familiar with it from Interstellar, I assume that was done here deliberately, where you couldn't really make out the words as much because it was more about what was going on with the faces emotionally, just the objectives that you could visually see. Like, it didn't matter what the F they were saying. Like, you could see the peril, and that's all that mattered.
Yeah.
Like, you knew it was about survival, rescue, and assistance. Like,
Yeah.
that's what the movie was, and you got it. Like, it's just about the human effort to accomplish these tasks at hand.
Yeah. Well, what I really loved about the characters on the boat was just their willingness to do something for the war effort. You know, like they were really the heroes, and they were so brave. They didn't have to be out there doing.
Well, I wouldn't say that and take away from like Tom Hardy's character or anyone else.
Well,
and
no,
say they're not heroes.
No, of course. Well, Tom Hardy was a badass as well, but I just on watching it a second time and like knowing when to really listen.
Yeah.
I definitely caught more, you know, because even in the way that Mr. Dawson talked about his late son, who we find out was part of the Air Force and died.
Yeah.
He talks about him in the present tense, right?
Like he's still there.
Like he's still there,
Yeah.
and he said something about like I knew he would help us pull through or something like that, and at that moment, like I really felt for him, and I realized that as an actor, Mark Rylance was carrying the story with him the whole time. And because the first time we watched it, I had such a hard time really hearing the dialogue properly.
Yeah.
I like I told you, I felt like I lacked that emotional hook, which was what I wanted out of the movie. And then second time round, when I could pay more attention to what was being said, you know, a lot of it was incredibly touching.
Sure.
Yeah.
I still disagree with the sound design to muddle up the dialogue.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would have preferred it if I could have heard it right the first time.
Yeah, I strongly disagree with that move. I don't know why they did that. I mean, I get the possibility of why they did that based on my experience with Interstellar. I disagree with it completely, and I really hope that Nolan stops doing that, just like he stopped shooting Batman with crazy fight scenes where you couldn't see anything. Like, people complain about in Batman Begins and Dark Knight that they couldn't see the fight scenes. So in Dark Knight Rises, he's like, well, fuck it, here. And he just let the camera sit there while Batman and Bane duked it out, right? Which was so awesome because it felt real, like you were part of the fight or whatever. Like, you just watched it unfold, and that was brilliant. And so I hope with his next movie, he does not do this, because that would really irritate me. I don't like the sound design, but everything else was awesome.
Yeah.
I need subtitles.
Yeah, well, also, a lot of the characters were speaking in British dialect.
Thick, indiscernible British dialogue.
And they mumble.
It's like, it was hard to make it out. But overall, it was still a great movie, so I liked it a lot. That concludes this long-ass discussion, and you guys, thanks so much for hanging out. If you stayed all the way to the end on this video, please do me a favor and say hashtag ACHARA Dunkirk in the comments, and just as an inside joke for y'all who stayed all the way to the end, appreciate it. Hopefully that's not offensive to you.
No, it's not.
Okay, so anyway, yeah, cool. Thanks you guys so much. Please check out ACHARA KIRK on the social media. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out other reactions, reviews, short films, and video game related videos. I'm Jaby Koay, and my eyes darted this way because I was looking at the sound to make sure it wasn't overmodulating, because we've had some sound issues recently which really sucked with the editing and all that. So anyway, I'm Jaby Koay. This is
ACHARA KIRK.
Peace out.